There's a specific moment in Red Dead Redemption 2 that I keep coming back to. It's not a shootout, a heist, or some big cinematic set piece. It's a quiet scene in a doctor's office in Saint Denis. Arthur Morgan, the protagonist of Red Dead Redemption 2, he sits down, he gets examined, and is told that he has tuberculosis. And just like that, in this terrible moment of a terminal diagnosis, the whole game changes. Not the world, but Arthur himself changes. And as I've been replaying through RDR2, I noticed that I myself have changed as I've played further and further into this story. I want to spend this video really digging into why that moment hits so hard, why it works so well as a storytelling device, and why it made me think about my own life in ways I wasn't expecting from a cowboy video game. Because that's the thing about great fiction, it sneaks up on you. You think you're playing a video game at first, but then suddenly you're sitting with something real and raw that you can feel. In most storytelling games, the main character you play as gets stronger and stronger as you progress throughout the story. Think of a game like Skyrim, for example. But the genius of Red Dead is that it takes the exact opposite approach. Arthur at the start of the game is almost mythically capable. He is perhaps the strongest, most feared man in the gang, second only to Dutch. As the story progresses, though, we see Arthur Morgan's character deteriorate physically, especially after the TB diagnosis occurs. This is one reason why I love the storytelling of this game so much. It follows our own journey as we move through life. At some point in your life, perhaps in your 20s or 30s, you'll be the youngest, sharpest, healthiest, most capable, and most attractive you'll ever be. You're on top of the world being praised by others and enjoying the blessings of life. Then before you know it, you might be sitting in a doctor's office with a fresh diagnosis and forced to confront something deeper and real about your own life that you've never been forced to confront before. These characters in this game, especially Dutch van der Linde and Arthur Morgan, they capture everything real and raw about the human condition that no other video game I've played through has been able to capture. To understand why the TB diagnosis hits the way it does, you have to understand who Arthur is going into that moment. Because Rockstar didn't just drop a terminal illness on a random character. They set this up very meticulously. At the start of the game, Arthur Morgan is the guy. He's the enforcer, the fixer, the most capable man in the van der Linde gang by a mile. When something needs to get done, Dutch sends Arthur. When someone needs to be intimidated, threatened, or just killed, Arthur's the guy for the job. He's not just competent, he's almost mythically so. Guys in the gang, they look up to him. His enemies fear him, and even people who hate him, they have respect for him. But here's the thing, Arthur has outsourced all meaning in his life to Dutch and the gang. He doesn't have a family of his own. He lost the woman he loved because the outlaw life got in the way. His son Isaac died years before the game even starts. It's mentioned a few times throughout the story. Arthur has no future he's building towards, no dream he's chasing. He just exists in the service of Dutch's vision. And Dutch's vision, as the game progresses, becomes increasingly delusional. The gang is falling apart. The law is closing in. Every plan Dutch cooks up ends in disaster and more death. But Arthur keeps following orders because what else is he going to do? This is all he knows. This is his family. Loyalty is literally the only value Arthur has left. So when we get to chapter 4 and Arthur gets to collect a debt from a dying man named Thomas Downs, a man he manhandles and threatens while already sick, he's just on autopilot. He's simply doing his job, being Dutch's enforcer, and he doesn't even think twice about it. But then, a few weeks later, Arthur's coughing, and he just can't stop. So let's talk about the diagnosis scene itself. The way this scene is framed is almost understated, which makes it more devastating in a way. Arthur just sits in that doctor's chair, he gets examined, and the doctor simply just tells him, advanced tuberculosis. He probably just has a few months left to live. Watch Arthur's face in that moment.
What is it?
It's not good news.
I guess that.
You got tuberculosis. Really sorry for you, son. It's a hell of a thing.
What you mean?
You're real sick. It's a progressive disease, and you'll be... Now, the best thing is rest, and getting somewhere warm and dry and taking it easy. Now, is that possible?
Sure, I can just take my winters in my country club in California. No, it's not possible.
Well, like I said, I'm real sorry.
Yeah, well...
What makes this scene genius from a writing standpoint is the context of how Arthur got sick. Thomas Downes gave it to him, a man Arthur was brutalizing for a debt he couldn't pay, a debt that was never going to meaningfully help the gang anyways. Arthur's death sentence came directly from one of the most pointless, routine acts of violence in his life. It wasn't a dramatic shootout. It wasn't a worthy enemy. It was simply a sick farmer who coughed on him while Arthur held him by the collar. Rockstar is saying something here. Arthur's mortality comes from his violence, specifically the casual, thoughtless kind. The kind he doesn't even register as significant anymore. That's a profound statement about consequence and how the small things we dismiss can end up mattering most. And think about the timing of it in the context of Arthur's arc. This happens at what is essentially Arthur's peak. He's at the height of his power, his reputation, his usefulness to the gang. He's the guy who everyone depends on. And it's exactly at that peak, during one of the most routine moments of his outlaw life, that his decline begins. That's not only just good storytelling, but that's just true to life. The moment things start to unravel, it's rarely some dramatic turning point you see coming. It's usually something small, something you barely noticed at the time. And then Arthur walks out of that doctor's office and back into the world. Same world, same gang, same Dutch, same Micah, same falling apart plan. But Arthur is different now. He just doesn't know it yet. Here's something the game does really subtly that I think people underappreciate. Arthur doesn't immediately transform into a changed man after the diagnosis. He drifts for a while. He keeps doing jobs and keeps following Dutch. There's a period where it almost seems like he's just going to ignore it and keep going. That's exactly what most people do, given Arthur's situation. You get bad news and your first instinct isn't to have some massive epiphany. It's to go back to your routine because the routine is safe and familiar, and it doesn't require you to confront the terrifying thing that just happened. But the effects of the diagnosis are working underneath Arthur's hard exterior. You can see it in his journal entries. Arthur starts writing differently, more reflective, more questioning. He sketches more, he notices the world around him more. The coughing as we progress throughout the game, it gets worse, and the game makes you feel it. It interrupts the gameplay, it interrupts conversation. It's always there. This constant reminder that the clock is ticking, Rockstar could have made the TB just purely narrative. They could have referenced it in just cutscenes. Instead though, they built it into the mechanics of the game so the player feels the intrusion of it, just like Arthur does. Most games are power fantasies that go in one direction, where you get stronger, faster, and just better in general. RDR2 runs that in reverse. The Arthur you're playing in Chapter 6 is physically a shadow of the Arthur in Chapter 1. His stats are draining, his body is failing. You feel it in the controls, and the stamina, and just the way he moves. Rockstar made you play a man deteriorating in real time. It's almost uncomfortable to experience, and I think that's exactly the point that they were going for. This is the transition period. Arthur's stuck between the man he was and the man he's about to become. And it's messy and unresolved because real change is messy and unresolved. Nobody wakes up one day and is just different. Then something shifts. And I think the shift happens gradually, across a series of small moments, rather than one big one. Arthur starts making choices that aren't about the gang, that aren't about Dutch's plan or loyalty or any of that. He starts doing things he wants to, because he thinks they're right. He helps a widow, he protects a family, he tells someone in trouble to get out while they still can. And in the context of Arthur's whole life, these aren't small things. These are radical acts of self-determination from a man who has spent his entire adult life subordinating his own judgment to Dutch Vanderland's. What the TB does, narratively, is it forces Arthur to ask a question he's never had to ask before. What do I actually believe? Not what does Dutch believe, not what's good for the gang, but what do I, Arthur Morgan, think is right? And the answer that slowly emerges is that Arthur, underneath all the violence and loyalty, is actually a decent man who made bad choices and then kept making them because stopping would mean admitting the first ones were wrong. The TB breaks that cycle by making the future suddenly finite. You can keep deferring your reckoning when you think you have unlimited time, but when that time runs out, you can't defer anymore. This is also, by the way, where the honor system in RDR2 becomes genuinely meaningful rather than just a gameplay mechanic. In the early game, your honor choices feel kind of arbitrary. Help this person, rob that one, whatever. But in Chapter 5 and 6, after the diagnosis occurs, high honor runs feel like Arthur actively choosing redemption. It feels like he's spending whatever time he has left trying to tip the scales. It gives every single side mission and every strange encounter a weight that most games never achieve. He's not helping people because it gives him experience points. He's helping people because he's dying and he wants to matter. He wants the ledger against him to look slightly less terrible when he reaches the end of it. I think most of us understand that feeling even if we've never been in Arthur's situation. We all have a desire to make amends, to do better, to not waste the time we have left. And here's the thing, Arthur shouldn't have needed a terminal diagnosis to start living this way. He had every opportunity before. He was at the top of his game for years, but he spent that time on autopilot, loyal to Dutch, not asking the hard questions. It took losing his health, losing his strength, and losing his future, everything the intro sets up at his peak, for him to finally wake up. That's the uncomfortable mirror that the game holds up, not just to Arthur, but to us. Okay, real talk for a second, and I know this might be getting a little heavy, but it's worth saying. The TB diagnosis storyline hit me the way it did because it's not really about tuberculosis. It's about the realization that time is finite and most of us are sleepwalking through it. Arthur gets a hard deadline. Most of us don't get told exactly when the clock runs out, but the clock is running out anyways. And the question the game is really asking through Arthur is, what are you doing with the time you have? Are you living on autopilot, loyal to things that don't deserve your loyalty, drifting through your days just doing what's expected? Or are you making actual choices, helping actual people, building something that actually matters? I'm 23 years old. I'm not dying of tuberculosis, obviously, but I've had moments where I've caught myself just going through the motions. Recently, I just moved to a new city and started a new job. It's a corporate job, and I've noticed how easy it is to simply watch the days fly by. I get what people mean now when they say their life flew by them after they started their corporate job. Now, for the time being, this job is the best option I have, but it's only been through replaying Red Dead Redemption 2 that I've recently been awakened to the fact that this job isn't what I want to do until I die. There's something about replaying through this game and seeing Arthur question everything he has done that has shaken me out of this pattern of life to realize how finite my time on this earth really is. Playing as Arthur has forced me to ask myself the same questions that Arthur began asking himself. Am I becoming the man I want to be, or am I just becoming the man circumstances made me? As sad as it is to say, sometimes the only thing that can force you to hold a mirror up to yourself and question everything you're doing is confronting the reality of your life ending one day, just as Arthur was forced to do. But I think that's the blessing in disguise that Red Dead is trying to teach us. Once you understand this crucial lesson, then you can begin living your life with purpose and with intentionality behind every decision you make. That's what great fiction does. It uses an extreme situation to illuminate something universal in all of us. The tuberculosis diagnosis in Red Dead Redemption 2, it isn't a plot device, but it's the whole point of the game. Everything before it is kind of a setup. Everything after it is the actual story. The story of a man choosing, for maybe the first time in his whole life, who he wants to be. And the reason Arthur Morgan is still living in people's heads years after they finish this game, it isn't because he's the coolest cowboy or the most badass outlaw. It's because his story is our story. The slow realization that you've been living for the wrong things. The desperate, beautiful attempt to do better before it's too late. That's Arthur Morgan, and that's the tuberculosis diagnosis. And that's why, even after all this time, this nearly decade-old game still has something to say to me. Thanks for watching. Please be sure to subscribe and like the video. I'll see you on the next one.
That's the way it is. You saved my life.